Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast. My name is Mike Otranto, and I'm a strategic account specialist at Workersoft. I am joined on today's webcast with Jim Patterson, who leads in a business development role. Today, we will focus on effective resource management with Project Online and OnePlan. After the webinar, you will receive an email with a copy of the recording and the slide deck so you can review. The line will not be open for questions, but you can type in your questions via the chat feature. If you want to know more about Workersoft and who we are today, we're a Microsoft joint venture that was founded in 2002. We provide consulting, business process outsourcing, managed services, and global support for staffing. We're a triple gold certified Microsoft partner, with less than 1% of partners ever having that designation. We are certified in project portfolio management, collaboration and content, and cloud productivity. From a project and portfolio management standpoint, we have a deep expertise in Project Online and Project Server. So we have a lot of experience helping organizations maximize their efficiency and technological advantage. We have a footprint all over North America and internationally. I will now hand off the webcast to Jim Patterson. Jim?
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for spending some time with us today for this webcast. Let's get into the topic area today of effective resource management with Project Online and OnePlan. Some of the topics we're going to touch on today is just an overview of resource management concepts and some current resource management challenges that we see in the marketplace. We'll talk about some certain steps that people can take and factors they can consider for successful resource planning and some resource scheduling tools that are in use today and that can be used. We're then going to go into a demonstration and show some of these concepts in action live, and then we'll close up with a summary and a wrap up and then some special offers for you in attendance here today. With that, let's get started. So let's go back to the 101 piece of this, of what is resource management. And one definition of that is resource management is the efficient and effective development and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed. Sounds pretty generic, but it really pretty much describes what it is. The benefits of embarking in on this process or this discipline is to provide things like resource visibility and understanding what and where our resources are working on, to increase business value, to make sure our resources are working on the right things that are going to deliver the right value to the organization, to save time and money so that we can effectively use our resources and do more with less. And the idea is to impact the bottom line in that fashion. Also to increase project success rates, because oftentimes projects sometimes fail because we don't have the right skills or resources available at the right times in order to deliver on the projects at the end of the day. Also to be able to accommodate demand. Demand comes from a lot of different angles in a lot of organizations. To be able to accommodate that demand and prioritize what we're going to work on so that we can actually succeed with what we commit to is another factor of what we need to think about when we do resource management. And overall is employee satisfaction. If we don't do a decent job of resource management, we can end up overtaxing resources and impacting the satisfaction that can lead to turnover and other things that impact the organization longer term. So if we look at some resource management challenges that we see in the marketplace today, one of them is resource ownership. In many complex organizations today, some of them highly matrixed or highly divisionalized and siloed, the ownership of those resources is sometimes a challenge. There's barriers at times of when people can get what resources to do what jobs in these types of complex organizations. Being able to get resources allocated on a timely fashion to projects is a challenge in many organizations, let alone prioritization. And that leads to that whole idea of resource focus. Resources are having things tasked to them from a variety of different directions in an organization, and just having their multitasking capabilities taxed, or even understanding what the priorities are, what they should be working on first ahead of other things, is sometimes a challenge in organizations today. And also the factor of non-project workload. When we think about project and portfolio management, oftentimes organizations allocate resources as if these resources are fully dedicated to these projects and don't have other operational or administrative workload to do within an organization. And by not factoring those things in, we can often tee ourselves up for failure by not properly factoring in what the available bandwidth is of our resources. And then from a resource tracking perspective, understanding what the right level of detail is getting feedback from the resources on a timely basis in a what oftentimes is a manual way, or as much as knocking on doors or corralling people around a conference room table just to figure out what people are working on and what the statuses are. The idea is that's a challenge today as far as getting those things in a streamlined fashion in an efficient way. The other is too much information. The idea is that with all this stuff coming at us from a number of different directions and the allocations that people are getting, sometimes they just have too much on their plate, let alone understanding who and what and when to feedback the information to. And oftentimes these things are disconnected from the project and portfolio management system, so that compiling that information is a highly manual process. And oftentimes we're doing manual or at least semi-manual mashups of data and manual creation of reports, PowerPoints, etc. And then just overall resource visibility. Do I have a mechanism outside of manual methods or disconnected methods to understand the resource picture in the organization? And in many cases, the answer in that organization is no, or we get it with a lot of painful steps in order to get there. So if we think about 5 resource management steps, and sometimes this is a progression for organizations, is sometimes the easiest part of resource management to start with is overall high-level capacity planning. And what I mean by that is not detailed resource allocations, but understanding what resources are needed, what types of resources are needed, often generically, and planning those out on a time-phased, more FTE or full-time equivalent basis to understand what the demand or headcount needs are for an organization to deliver on projects. And then next, there's the resource allocation. This is where you actually allocate them to specific projects, and then people then assign them to specific discrete pieces of work or tasks to be assigned to in a very detailed fashion. And then the resource tracking is, how do we get feedback on, once they've been assigned, what they're actually accomplishing and how much effort they're spending on those types of things, so we understand how we're burning those resources, and if the way they're actually executing aligns in any shape or fashion with the way we planned it from a capacity and resource allocation basis. And then there's overall team management, getting resources to work better together as teams so that we can become more efficient. So rather than looking at resources as individuals, how do we benefit from the synergies of team management so that we can actually get teams working together in more highly effective or efficient ways as they work together over time? And then the concept of overall work management, and that's where you really start to factor in other work in the organization, non-project operational work, administrative work, and other things that need to be factored into the equation. If you think about these things, they really are a progression where you can tackle the capacity planning early, but to get to the maturity of doing all of these aspects in an effective way is sometimes a journey for organizations, and they don't need to tackle it all at once as long as they start embarking on the journey. So if we look at resource management maturity dimensions, things that happen in different levels of granularity or different levels of intensity are the things of understanding like roles and the resources, understanding in a central resource pool, for example, what roles and specific resources you have at your disposal to assign to resource. And then there's the whole concept of planning and tracking granularity. Depending on your maturity or your desires or needs as an organization, you may plan your resources at a more higher or more detailed level of granularity depending on the need or desire of the outcome for the organization. There's also the concepts of approval and negotiation, and this is where you get into the whole functional or matrixed organizations and the project organizations that need to negotiate back and forth between what the resource demands are, meaning what I need, versus who I'm going to get to fulfill that need from a resource perspective. And the approval negotiation process and the degree to which that happens, both formally and informally in an organization, is usually a function of resource management maturity. Then there's the resource governance and prioritization. And it's really tying this into your overall portfolio management process so that we understand that people are working on the right things, the highest prioritization, highest priority things, and making sure that we're doing those things first and not working on things that aren't meeting the prioritization goals of an organization. Then there's forecasting versus actuals. A lot of folks do a great job at first of just forecasting information and saying this is our projection of where we're going to leverage our resources over time. But unless we start tracking the actuals of how we're actually spending those resources and adjusting those forecasts, we're maybe not getting the best benefit of our overall resource management process. But forecasting is a good place to start to understand what we have and what we can commit to from a project portfolio perspective. And then leveraging and tying these things to resource costs and rates to understand from a dollar perspective what this means to the organization. That's another aspect that oftentimes comes at a later stage of maturity in the resource management process. So if we look at a Gartner model on the kind of a crawl, walk, run type of approach to resource management, if you look at the different dimensions on the left side of resource capacity planning, detailed resource allocation, managing human resources, team formation, and personal productivity, notice that maturity level 2, which is considered a crawl stage, notice that it's mostly about resource capacity planning, defining high-level project roles and staff, and then prioritize projects and programs and allocate them at a fairly high capacity planning level. And on the detailed resource allocation side, it's really just to determine which projects we should start based upon the fact that we know we have resources to do them. It doesn't ask for a lot of rigor there. But notice as we move through level 3, for example, where there's more aspects of that detailed resource allocation, or even in the capacity planning where we have more refined demand requirements and we assign the right resources based upon criteria or skills, that's where we kind of take our game up another notch and then leverage those same disciplines, but do them in a more mature and more robust fashion. And obviously in maturity level 4 at the run stage, we're doing those things to yet another level of detail, rigor, and maturity. So some resource management musts is, I think, when we talk about this concept of maturity or readiness, I think we need to be honest with ourselves as organizations when we start. It's like my mom used to say to me about my eyes being bigger than my stomach for my appetite. The idea is that we really need to be honest with ourselves and assess our individual organization's readiness to tackle these things. And that can be cultural factors, just personnel factors, other things. But be honest with ourselves about our overall readiness and what we think we can sustain. Let's not try to be too ambitious to where we can't fulfill or sustain it, but let's do enough to stretch or improve the organization incrementally. And in that aspect, we need to understand the organization's maturity level based upon some of the criteria we saw in some of those prior slides. And we need to understand the general overall environment. And that could mean your organizational structure, that could mean the culture in the organization, it could mean the status of project planning or project management maturity in general. And the idea is understand the overall landscape that you're doing this into, and then build a resource management roadmap in a crawl, walk, run type of approach. Take this in a staged approach, but do it purposefully and figure out where you want to go, what that journey is going to look like, and then be purposeful about what steps you're going to take from that early level of maturity or crawling, all the way through that walk and run phase that you want to get through. And second of all, you want to define your process first, meaning once we have this roadmap in place, let's have our process steps defined. Let's not try to automate something that's not defined or may even be vapor. Having the technology in place to do those things and automate it, if you really haven't thought out a good process to fit to it, is sometimes a misstep, or oftentimes a misstep, I should say. Let's make sure we have an idea of what that process should look like before we try to embed it or embody it in a solution. So how are organizations managing resources today? Well, for the most part, people start out using Excel almost exclusively across the board. People aren't doing it on the back of a napkin any longer, but people start with Excel because it's a grid-based, tabular-based type of interface, and it's freely available. Most people know how to use it for at least some features or functions for standard spreadsheet type of capabilities, but we all know how to use it to some degree, and we can just extend our use of that to resource planning. A lot of folks do maybe just numeric tabular things and maybe not the graphical Gantt charts here, but some people do a combination of both. And because it's a tool that's fairly universal, people find that it's easy to share. Just send a file or put it out on a file share and let people have at it. So it's a good building block foundation, but once again, it is a static model. It is a standalone file that these things are being built in, and it's limited in some ways from that perspective. When we use Excel as a resource tool, everything is manually updated. We're talking line by line, cell by cell, which can be a very tedious process. The system really doesn't do a whole lot of work for you on a time phasing and scheduling basis. You also have the inability to summarize resources across multiple projects, meaning if you have different project plans that are being done in Excel and they're owned by individual project owners, compiling those into a common model or a common view requires a lot of manual manipulation or a lot of macros and other complex things that are done in more of an ad hoc fashion. And the other part of it is that spreadsheets are kind of fragile. It's not too difficult to delete a cell which might have a formula or other things in it that might totally impact the rest of the model that you want to go through. So the idea there is the resources and the dynamic model is something that's disconnected from a project and portfolio management system typically. So the problem with Excel is there's a lack of standards. Oftentimes different spreadsheets are very individual in their nature and the way they model it, and there are definitely differences between the way different people model things in spreadsheets. It's manual, as we said. There's really no overall visibility of resource capacity by its nature. It can be time consuming to keep these things updated, and by the time you update a complex spreadsheet, it's probably out of date by the time you share it. The visibility and insight is really based upon the information that's in that individual file and doesn't factor in other things. And it really ends up not being part of an overall governance process or workflow as we go on through. From a teamwork perspective on a collaborative basis, relevant documents, risks, issues, other things that people are working on are not part of the mix in an Excel spreadsheet. And it really doesn't factor in these headcount plans, for example, to an overall strategic alignment of project and company objectives as we go on through. And there's many others we could talk about, but one of the biggest ones for me is the fact that spreadsheets are easily broken. And the idea there is we want something a little bit more robust. So what, if we're going to transform these things, what are some of our transformative options that we'll work in? And one of them is, let's work with some embedded processes, meaning let's embed the processes into our technologies. Once we've thought those out and understand what our processes are, let's embed them into the tools that we're working with. And instead of individual files that are just basically encapsulated pieces of information, let's go into a central data store or database, something that has a repository that gives us the ability to enter resource data for a purpose, but leverage it in many different ways. One of those ways is in actionable intelligence, compiling those things for visibility into more aggregate pieces of information, and also leveraging them into more reporting or business intelligence tools that we can leverage to understand and help us to make decisions. Now, to that end, Project Online from Microsoft provides a good capability to provide that central solution with a central repository of information, and also allows you to embed processes into this and workflows, for example. It's really designed to be an end-to-end solution from your overall portfolio management, which could be just portfolio visibility, but can also be portfolio selection and optimization. And then the overall project management on the schedule side of things, and having that integrated into the mix so that when you talk about our focus today of resource management, it is done in the context of the overall portfolio, of the overall project management execution, and doing the resource management at a level that's appropriate for what your organization is doing on their maturity or organizational readiness journey. And that could be high-level capacity planning. It could be timesheets against those projects to capture the actuals, or it could also be detailed resource assignments down to the individual assignment on individual task level, all the while having project collaboration features at your disposal through that resource management process. Now, that being said, Microsoft Project Online really allows you to do a number of different things from a overall capability perspective. There's this concept of resource engagements for a high-level forecast of FTE-based type of planning against a project. And then you have detailed schedules that allow you to assign individuals or resources to very detailed tasks to make those things happen. Usually in a mature environment, the total resource requirement is met by doing early resource planning in that capacity planning resource engagement level. But then prior to executing understanding who's going to do what specifically and allocating those resources that have been assigned to a project, giving them more detailed assignments within the schedules themselves. And this typically represents a more fully functional type of resource requirement and a more rolling wave process from higher level requirements down to more detailed allocations. Now, with the capabilities that are in Microsoft Project Online and embodied in the Microsoft Project Desktop, a more visual approach can be had by leveraging Wickersoft's OnePlan. OnePlan really takes the core capabilities that are available into Project Online and extends it by adding, in this case, more visual resource planning within projects. It kind of takes that more data-driven type of process that you have in Microsoft Project for resource planning and really allows us to use a more visual approach to schedule resources and allocate resource engagements in a graphical way that's easy to visualize and easy to manipulate with drag and drop capability. This means also just not identifying the resources that are in the resource plan, but also the individual elements and be able to drag them along a timeline or drag them from one resource to the other, whether we offload from one person to another or offload that more generic capacity plan assignment to a more named individual as we go on through. And the idea is accessing this by people's roles, skills, and availability in a very graphical way, but also having it embedded and fully integrated with Project Online. Then you can also look at this not just from a project-specific basis, on a project-by-project basis, but looking at it from a more global resource management perspective. You can actually look at, and it's integrated with the core Project Online resource pool. The idea is look at any resource or group of resources within the enterprise and get a visual look at who's over and under allocated and see what things that they're working on. Also, what's been completed versus what's in progress versus what is yet to be done or what might be a request. And the idea is this visual capability is embedded by OnePlan right into Project Online as you're doing your project portfolio schedule and resource scheduling process, and just makes it an easier way to get that data in the first place and then keep it updated and current through a graphical drag and drop type of method. And then there's the whole idea of team collaboration, the idea of being able to do these capacity plans. And if, let's say you're staying at a higher level capacity plan level in an early stage of maturity, and you want to be able to get updates on these high level engagements that we have that might not be detailed task oriented. OnePlan allows you to request updates from your team members via email and actually have that email be able to give the team member a mechanism to feedback the status that's needed and have it come back into OnePlan for updating the resource status, and also having its status Microsoft Project Online by default. And the idea is it's giving a simple interaction, the byplay between project managers and resource managers as we're deciding what resources are going to be used in the planning phase, but then from the project and resource managers to the team member to get them to see what's on their plate, but also then give an easy mechanism to feedback what they've accomplished. And then because of all this resource capacity planning data and all these engagements that are done graphically within OnePlan, and because it's syncing with the engagements capability within Project Online, this data is now available to us for portfolio analysis. So as we're doing project prioritization and understanding in our project selection and optimization what it is that we can do, that information is valuable in being leveraged in doing our portfolio analysis and scenario modeling so that we can decide what are the right projects for us to work on given the headcount we have, or maybe even through a hypothetical understanding what it is that we need in order to get all the projects done that are being requested of us. And then because it feeds that rich data set in the Project Online repository, this information is readily available to us through dynamic reporting and analytics using embedded Power BI reports, leveraging that OnePlan and Project Online data, meaning for the non-practitioners, the one who have oversight and need to know information on resource capacity and be able to slice it for the things or areas of interest they have by, say, departments or by roles or by individual resources or teams, to be able to slice that through a reporting mechanism very easily without having to get into the depths of the actual execution solution is something that is a natural output of the process, and you don't have to pull these together manually like people do today by mashing up data. So what we're going to talk about today is really about resource capacity planning or resource management, where you have agreements between project managers and resource managers, meaning the project managers have needs for their projects on specific skill sets or types of resources. The resource managers then review those requests and then edit and approve or reject those requests based upon assigning specific people to fill those to the project manager and having the project manager accept those, have them in their project plan so that they can actually do more detailed allocation potentially within their schedules. Another use case might be to have it start with the resource manager and the resource manager actually do all of the resource planning and say, this is what you can have for your projects, and then having the project managers being able to allocate those things in more detail within their purview, within their specific project plans. So with that, let's show you a little bit of this OnePlan capability in action. So here we are in Microsoft Project Online. For those of you that aren't familiar with Project Online, it really is a central repository-based project and portfolio management solution. And it's, for those of you who are of many people today who are rolling out Office 365 or who already have deployed Office 365, notice it's part of your Office 365 environment. If you come in here, it's just like any of the other tools that you would actually access through the waffle here in Office 365, so that it becomes part of just your overall business productivity tool set. And you can leverage some of those other Office tools in the context of your project management process. And we have some other webinars that we have on our website that illustrate the more general capabilities of using Project Online within the Office 365 context. Now, as we come on through here and we look at, my apologies, a portfolio of projects in our project center, this is really a roster of all the projects that we have on our plate within the solution. Some of them are still requested, some of them are approved, some of them are in progress. But the idea here is that we have this as a hub of project information that's available to us to get into all different dimensions of the project management process. Now, for today, our focus is on resource management. So let's say I wanted to just drill into the social networking integration project. When we do that, what we'll notice is that we have all kinds of information associated with our projects. And the idea there is we could have overall summary information, strategic impact, we can have schedules and financial information. But notice in here we have a resource scheduler. And this is OnePlan that's fully integrated and embedded in these detail pages as part of the attributes of the Microsoft project process. And the idea here is we've got resources that have been allocated to this project. We have both generic resources and we have named individual resources that are specific to this social networking integration project. And when we leverage these are being actually synchronized and leveraged from the actual Microsoft project online centralized resource pool, because it's fully in synchronization with that. We can zoom our different timeline options. Pardon me, I've got a notification coming up here. I've got notifications coming up for Daniel here. But anyway, we zoom the timeline options. I'm looking at these things on a monthly basis here, but I could also look at those things down to a daily basis or weekly basis or annual basis as I'm doing my resource planning to determine that. And I can determine my planning horizon here, meaning what that horizon is as far as how far out I want to view as I'm doing my planning. Is it out here? I'm looking at it about a 6-month horizon as opposed to, say, an annual horizon as we go on through. Now, if I open up this generic business analyst, which generally is resource requests, we're saying generically, I need a business analyst to gather business requirements. Notice here I got them gathering business requirements on this social networking integration at about 40%. I can hover over the engagement and get things like whether or not it's started, what the start and end dates are that are anticipated, what the effort hours are. But also by clicking on it, we can go in here and look at all the details around that, and we can actually enter that data if we want to, or we can do it graphically as we drag things around. As we want to add engagements here, I can either go in and add a new engagement like we see here there to enter the information from scratch, or I could actually come in here and I can go into a specific piece of information and I can actually drag through a time frame and add an engagement simply graphically like that, and then enter the specific data and it captured the time frame of where I dragged to. And then I can actually come in and actually allocate things to say maybe 50% allocation and have it calculate what those hours would be over that time span. The idea is that we can very easily enter these engagements and get them into the solution as we go on through. Also, adding new resources is easy as well. I can simply add and then basically say, what if I wanted to add a tester to the mix? I can actually go in and actually sync up with a centralized resource pool and grab a generic tester, and then say I want to use this for, say, user acceptance testing or UAT. And I could say I want to start that, over a time period, say maybe over a month or so. I can grab that and say I want them to do this about maybe 25% of their time and have it calculate the hours. And the idea there is it now adds the tester and the UAT piece, or I can move it into different places on the timeline very graphically without having to go through the build team process that typically happens when you do this in Project Online by itself. So the idea here is that we can do a lot of graphical and visual type of planning for our resource capacity as we go on through. Now, what I'm looking at here is over and under allocation, just in the context of this particular project. But at any given point in time, I can actually toggle back and forth to showing all work. And then I can basically go in and, as I'm planning here, seeing how people are already allocated based upon what I have in here, and understand even before I over allocate them, how people are already spoken for across the enterprise, and look at different projects and things that these different resources may already be assigned to. We also get at any given point in time summary information about all the resource planning that we're doing for this particular project. Now, if we want to look at this in a more global context and not just from an individual project perspective, I can go into the centralized resource pool, and we have a scheduler in there as well. And in that, I'm looking at this resource scheduler in the context of the overall resource pool. And the idea here is I have a roster of all the resources that I can look at any given point in time and how they're allocated across all work. Now, I can just do the same things about choosing planning horizon and zoom from month, etc. But as I go on through, I can actually go in and look at maybe filtering down by roles, for example. And as if I filter down to, say, just the business analyst, I can go down and focus on this and look at the information or look at the people and the generics specifically allocated or associated with this particular role. And as you can see, I have some people that are over allocated. I have some people that are very underutilized as I go through here. Now, I can open up, say, Adam Noshimuri, and notice that he's got some work in here. I've also can see that he may have some over allocation, or I may have a generic business analyst that has some information in here that needs to be allocated to an individual. And I can also see, for example, that Patrick Sands is someone who actually needs some work. So I could either relieve any over allocation on an individual, or I could actually take something like this build reports and drag it down to Patrick Sands and now give him some work so that he has some utilization while offloading some over allocation that I might have for another resource in the system. The idea is it's easy to do this from a graphical drag and drop perspective, all the while having visibility into what the current allocation levels are for each individual resource, whether they be generic or named individuals. Now, from a statusing perspective, if I wanted to get updates from Patrick, it's as simple as selecting that engagement and basically requesting updates. And those things would actually determine what fields of data I'd like them to update. In this case, it's status, due date, percent done, and completion status. And I can basically enter a message and just send an updated request. And Patrick would get an email, and then through that email would be able to provide the updates and have that engagement updated electronically without having to actually specifically go into the plan itself. Now, all of this information syncs back into Project Online and into Microsoft Project as we go on through. And the reason that's important is because there's some very powerful tools within Project that we can use to help the overall portfolio management and project management process, but we want to leverage this advanced planning information here in a way that takes into account all these other dimensions. Now, one way to do that is through the portfolio analysis capability that's in Project Online. And by leveraging the portfolio analysis, it would actually leverage all of the resource planning that was done via OnePlan and feeds the resource capacity planning or engagements capability within Project Online. So for example, I'm looking at a scenario of suspected or proposed projects, and it looks like of all the ones that I'm considering, if I don't hire any additional resources, that I'm only going to be able to get 70% of the overall value of this portfolio because of my resource constraints or my current resource mix. Based upon the timing of these projects and the resources that are required, I can't do all of them within this time frame. So that basically there's a bunch of projects here that couldn't be done in that time frame. Now, this is based upon the fact that we aggregate the requirements that were entered within OnePlan and fed into the resource engagements in Project Online. And when we look at the requirements details, what we'll see is where there's a bunch of over and under allocations by role. And here by the different roles, we can see where our constraints are or where we're overtaxed on these different resource roles, because on each of these individual projects down below here, we have some role-based allocations that were entered in our planning process that we'd done prior. Now, given that, if we go back to our Gantt chart, we can do hypotheticals. We can move things around on the timeline to see if we can do more if we just stagger those things. But maybe some advanced things, for example, is say, what if we just could get more resources? What if we wanted to ask leadership for 3 more resources, for example, and be able to calculate that and see what those resources could do for us as far as getting more projects done? We can actually get more benefits for the organization, but also notice I can get about 7% more value in this portfolio and get 2 more projects moved into the mix by adding those 3 resources. Even more importantly, what the system will tell us is it'll tell us what resources we will need to make that happen, leveraging our capacity planning information and the resource pool designations that we have for those particular efforts. And it looks like where we're the most constrained is in the developer ranks, because it looks like I would need 3 developers to get that incremental gain in my portfolio. And I would need 1 developer on the new customer success program to this degree, and I need 2 developers on the Windows 7's compliance effort as we go on through. So just some good analytics and scenarios that we can do iteratively. We can do a number of different scenarios and compare them against one another using our capacity planning information. Now, the reason that's possible is because all of the capacity planning that we did within OnePlan actually gets fed into the details within Microsoft Project Online. There is a capability directly within Project Desktop to do this more tabularly or numerically. And the idea is that these engagements are giving us the percentages that we go on through here. Now, when we plan in OnePlan and we do this in a more visual way, that visual planning just updates these numbers in a more tabular way in the repository in Project Online, meaning it's synchronized fully with everything else you're doing in Project Online. And then it can be leveraged in the aggregate across a multiple project basis within the portfolio analysis, for example, in Project Online. Now, ultimately, because we have a central repository of all this information, we have some robust reporting. So if we go into the reports section here, we'll notice that there's a library of different report categories within here. And let's focus in on the 1 ppm project resource status reports. And for that, we have a native feed from Project Online and OnePlan over into this reporting, which is powered by Power BI. Now notice, instead of going right over to Power BI as a solution, these reports are embedded within the pages, within the SharePoint pages within Project Online. And the idea is that we can get good information for the non-practitioner, for example, who doesn't have to be in the actual solution to enter data, to be able to look at an overall dashboard of capacity versus demand, be able to look at overall utilization and availability, be able to filter by things like programs or work types or those types of things, be able to filter by things like positions or roles and get this thing down to, say, the overall business analysts only. I can get that down to, say, overall utilization, where I get more detailed information, heat map by who and what resources are overtaxed or underutilized at any given point in time. Or maybe even just some high-level availability of which roles still have availability or which ones I'm going to have trouble getting for specific projects as we move on through. And then even looking at the multiple dimensions. We have our capacity planning that's done in OnePlan that actually can give us an idea on this line of what we thought we were going to do from a high-level capacity plan, but then ultimately compare it to what's being allocated in detailed tasks in resource assignments versus in the gray what comes across in the timesheets or what we actually spent time on. And then we can actually look at just the engagement level information that got fed into OnePlan and look at what this aggregates up to. In this case, it's by allocated by which portfolios that this resource planning is being done. All the while, we can slice and dice through these things by position and role. We can do it by resource departments. We can do it by resource names. Or really, these can be modified to have whatever filtering capabilities you'd like to have on them. So ultimately, from end to end, from early planning through execution and through all the reporting and analytics through it, we have the capabilities to have this seamlessly done without manual intervention or cobbling together of reports and visualizations that you might have. So with that, let's go to our summary and wrap up today. From a summarization perspective, and what I see probably as the high points and takeaways are, I hope you see that resource management is a critical success factor for project and portfolio management success, and that your approaches and the processes you take on this should align with your organizational readiness and maturity so that it's something that you can sustain and actually succeed with. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't go on a roadmap to constant improvement. And that high-level capacity planning is a good place to start for that. More detailed resource allocation can follow as ready or as needed by your organization. Hopefully, you've seen that Project Online provides a great overall platform for all your PPM capabilities, but that Wickersoft OnePlan really extends to provide enhanced visual planning and capabilities that's both embedded and fully synchronized with Project Online. And then OnePlan is fully integrated so that from a reporting perspective, from a transactional data modeling perspective, and all the things that you would do actively within the system as users, it all seamlessly end-to-end works together without you having to do any cobbling together of data or doing any integration. You know, to recap or review on what Mike shared at the outset in the introductions, Wickersoft is a global company that can help you in all these areas, both from the consulting and application side. We have a footprint around America, and we are a joint venture with Microsoft. So we are partly owned by Microsoft, so we do have some good insights in that regard. And then all these areas, whether it be business applications, things that we've developed like OnePlan and implementing the Microsoft technologies, all the consulting services to help you get the most out of those investments in those technologies, all the education and training that you might want, our own training and things that we have with IIL. And then we have staffing services and managed services. So if you're short on resources and you need contingent staffing, or even want Wickersoft to help you by managing some of this process as a managed service, we have those capabilities, and we do that for many clients today. We focus today on project and portfolio management and project, but we really execute on these concepts and say resource management today and all the other disciplines, and not only just Project Online, but also in Visual Studio for the more agile folks who are doing scaled agile, in SharePoint who have digital workplace initiatives, and then just the Dynamics 365 world where work is being done in things like professional services automation and field service management. All of this stuff ties to the Microsoft Cloud and leverages Power BI. So we have expertise in not only these individual technologies, but we actually have the technologies that actually make these all work together. So from a next steps perspective, we have some special offers for you. We'd like to offer anyone who's interested and would contact us a free PPM and resource management assessment and roadmap to understand where you're at today and what it might take to get you on the journey. We also can offer a free OnePlan and Project Online trial with Wickersoft Chaperone support to kind of let you test drive and see how it might work for your organization. Or if a next step might just be we did a high-level personalized, high-level demo today, and you want something more personalized, one-on-one for your organization that meets your specific needs, we're happy to schedule that with you. And to that end, you can either email us generally at nasales@wickersoft.com. That's North America Sales is what it's short for. Mike Otranto, who's in our business development capacity, who gave the introduction, or you can reach out to me directly, and you'll be getting copies of these slides after the presentation, so you don't have to take all this down. And then if you want to look at more of our solutions, you can go to us.wickersoft.com. On the Project Online pieces, you can go to project-online.com, and specifically project-online.com/OnePlan if you want to look at more about OnePlan. And if you're interested in other webinars, we have a bunch of on-demand ones that we've done and a whole library of ones we've done in the past, and a schedule of upcoming webinars that's soon to be listed for the next month. You can go to us.wickersoft.com/webinars.